Hi everyone, Small here, back again with another Arknights operator review, and this time we are sinking our teeth into Entelechia. She's a standard 6-star operator, brought to life by Ask, the same artist behind one of Arknights' all-time legends, Surtur. Now, let's be real, the gorgeous art alone is more than enough to win over a lot of players. That vampire aesthetic is absolutely killer. But what about the meta crowd? The ones who only care if a unit breaks the game? Well, according to most of the community, Entelechia kinda sucks. And no, not just because she's a vampire. Sadly, even though she's virtually Surtur's sister, she didn't inherit the same game-breaking gene. In fact, most of the community has already slapped a big ol' skip label on her. But hey, you know how we do things around here. We're gonna break down what went wrong with her kit and see if maybe, just maybe, there's still a hidden gem buried under all the disappointment. So let's not waste any more time, let's dive in and see what Entelechia really brings to the table. Alright, let's start with the basics. Entelechia belongs to the Reaper archetype in the guard class. If that sounds familiar, it's because she shares this archetype with folks like Executor Alter and La Pluma. And if you've used either of them, you probably already know what this archetype brings to the table and what it doesn't. See, Reapers have one big, glaring weakness. They can't be healed the normal way. Yeah, no medic is gonna save them. Watch this clip. Poor Shining can only stand there helpless, while Entelechia gets steamrolled. It's tragic. Now, sure, you can patch this all with things like Bard healing or shoes sewn tiles, which somehow work on Reapers, but let's be honest, those are niche workarounds that limit your team comp and restrict your placement options, making things more awkward than they need to be. So, why even bother with Reapers? Well, they do have their upsides. First off, they've got a slightly wider attack range than your average ground unit. But more importantly, they deal AoE damage, meaning they can hit everything in their range simultaneously. Check out this clip. Entelechia is chewing through waves of enemies like it's nothing. That's the kind of cleanup power Reapers are made for. They also get a bit of self-sustain. Every enemy they hit heals them for 50 HP, up to their block limit, which is usually 2. With Entelechia's module, that number bumps up to 60 HP per hit. It's not enough to tank major damage, but it definitely helps with sustain in low-pressure fights. So yeah, Reapers are clearly designed for one thing, holding a lane solo against big crowds of weak enemies. They've got a lower DP cost than Juggernauts like Madrock, can block 2 enemies and can clear waves fast. It's no coincidence that Entelechia's trial stage during her event puts her in exactly that situation, a flood of squishy enemies that need to go down quick. But interestingly, the design direction for Entelechia isn't about leaning into those strengths. Instead, the devs clearly tried to patch up the archetype's weaknesses, especially its survivability. Whether or not that worked, well, let's take a closer look. Entelechia's first talent comes with 2 effects. First, she steals 75 max HP from enemies with every hit, up to a cap of 1350 HP. Second, she applies a DOT to anything she hits, 200 arts damage per second for 5 seconds. Let's talk about the DOT first, since that one is nice and simple. Once Entelechia hits an enemy, they start taking arts damage every second for 5 seconds. The only catch is it doesn't stack, not even with multi-hit effects like those over skill 2. Reapplying the DOT just resets the timer, nothing more. On the plus side, the DOT does stick around for the full 5 seconds even if you retreat her, which is neat. On the downside, it doesn't trigger the Reaper healing passive, so no free HP from that. Still, it's a solid addition to her kit. It fits the Reaper playstyle well, helping her tear through swarms of enemies with hit count based death mechanics, stuff like those enemies from Reed Altars or Lynx events. Now for the trickier part, the max HP steal. Like most steal effects in Arknights, it has two effects. It debuffs the enemy by reducing their max HP, and it buffs Entelechia by increasing hers. And here's the key, these effects work independently. Even if she's already stolen all the max HP she can get, she'll still reduce the enemy's max HP with every hit. The self-buff part is easy to grasp. With this talent fully stacked, Entelechia can hit almost 4000 HP. That's Defender tier bulk, right up there with Hoshiguma. But what about the enemy side of the equation? What does stealing max HP do in practice? Well, after testing it on a high defense, high res enemy, it seems the HP reduction is basically equal to dealing 75 true damage per hit, capped at 1350 total. So yeah, it's like having a bit of built-in true damage, which sounds great on paper, but in reality, it's barely noticeable. Most elite enemies have so much HP that 1350 is just a drop in the bucket. You will almost never feel the impact. So really, the only part of this that matters is the bonus HP Entelechia gets. It has its moments, like letting her tank those nasty cannon shots in episode 10, something Executor Alter can't do. But outside of very specific situations like that, the value is kind of limited. Because more HP doesn't solve her core issue, she still can't heal reliably. Even with the boosted health, she's still relying on cheap healing from her trait and a one-time top-up from her second talent, which we'll get to in a sec. That means this extra HP usually just delays the inevitable. She still dies if she takes sustained damage. Honestly, I'd have much rather seen another way for her to heal than just slapping more HP onto her. Also worth noting, the HP steal doesn't work on boxes or enemies with hit count based HP bars. All in all, it's a solid talent thanks to the DOT, but the HP steal part feels kind of whatever. Maybe a future module will let her stack DOTs, like Thorns does with his X module, which would be great, but more realistically, probably just a numbers tweak. Entelechia's second talent doubles down on survivability. The first time her HP drops below 25%, she gets an emergency heal for 50% of her max HP, kind of like a panic button. On top of that, she gains 10% physical damage reduction for the rest of the deployment. And yep, this resets every time you redeploy her, so you can technically get multiple uses out of it across the stage. This is a really handy safety net, especially for someone who can't be healed through normal means. It gives you some breathing room if things go sideways, just enough time for her to finish off a threat or survive something that would have flattened her otherwise. And that 50% heal scales with her max HP, so there's a nice bit of synergy with her first talent. The more HP she's stolen, the bigger the emergency heal. As for the physical damage reduction, it stacks multiplicatively with Sanctuary. That's great news because Shu's Sewn Ties give both passive healing to enmity operators and Sanctuary. So yeah, Shu is a solid partner for Entelechia. That said, throwing support at her kind of defeats the purpose of using a solo lane holder, doesn't it? Now, if all these sounds familiar, it's probably because Blaze, the OG one from 5 years ago, has a similar talent. She too gets a 50% heal when she drops below 25%, but Blaze also goes invincible for 7 seconds afterward. That's a huge advantage against multi-hit enemies like Patriot, who slaps you with 4 hits in a single attack. Entelechia's heal triggers on the first hit, but she'll still eat the next 3 and go down. Entelechia also launched with a module that buffs both her Reaper trait and this second talent to make her even tankier. At level 1, her HP on hit jumps from 50 to 60. At level 2, the emergency heal gets boosted to 70% and the physical damage reduction goes up to 15%. Then, at level 3, it's 85% heal and 20% physical damage reduction. Honestly, it's a solid progression. The designer has been quite generous with the numbers here, but if you're short on module blocks, level 2 is a good stopping point, since it gives you most of the meaningful upgrades. All in all, this second talent is a big win for her usability. It smooths out some of the pain of using an operator who can't be healed and makes her way less punishing to play. Even just as a cushion for mistakes, it's doing good work. Plus, it gives her a slight edge over Executor Alter in some situations, which I think is smart design. It avoids making the two feel like carbon copies. But whether this extra survivability is enough to fix her core issues, well, we'll talk more about that in the wrap-up. Alright, let's dive into Entelechia's skills, starting with skill 1. And, well, it's about as simple as it gets. She gets a solid attack multiplier on her next hit, and it hits twice. That's it. No fancy effects, no gimmicks. If it sounds familiar, that's because it's basically La Pluma's skill 1 with a slightly different number slapped on. From a design perspective, this just feels a bit lazy. Now, the skill is an offensive recovery type, so Entelechia needs to land hits to charge it, but with just a 2 SP cost at Mastery 3, it recharges so fast you'll barely notice. You'll see her spamming this skill constantly, especially in mob-heavy stages. Since it activates automatically, it's great for AFK setups and fits the Reaper archetype nicely. The constant double hits give her more chances to leech HP through her trait, which helps her stay topped up in low-pressure situations. Plus, it's effective at shredding through mob waves, exactly what you want in a solo lane holder. The catch, her damage per hit is pretty meh. We are talking about 1400-ish per strike, which means even mid-defense enemies will slow her down. And anything with 1500 plus defense, yeah, she's gonna bounce off them like wet noodles. Just look at this clip, it takes forever to chew through those shield guys. Now, in her intended role, that might not be a huge deal. Most regular trash mobs don't have inflated stats, and elite enemies are supposed to be handled by someone else. But even in her niche, she's up against heavy competition. Take Blaze or Ulpianos for example. Both have AFK skills, both deal higher damage, and crucially, they can be healed normally. Sure, they don't hit as many enemies at once, but with their raw damage, they usually don't have to. So where does that leave Entelechia? Her skill 1 isn't bad by any means, it's clean, reliable, and has some nice synergy with her archetype. But in a game overflowing with strong lane holders, it just doesn't do enough to stand out. If your roster is thin in that department, skill 1 could be a good AFK option. But if you already have a strong core of AFK lane holding guards, you're probably better off investing elsewhere. Now let's move on to Entelechia's skill 2, and this one is actually pretty unique. When activated, Entelechia stops attacking and 2 rings of blades appear, one around her and one around the last unit you deployed on a ground tile. Each ring hits the 8 surrounding tiles with physical AoE damage. And yes, if you've deployed a ranged unit on a ground tile, like you can do in certain maps, that works too. The important thing to note here is that all the damage comes from Entelechia herself. That means it triggers her Reaper healing as well as the DOT and HP steal from her first talent. But it also means she'll take reflect damage if she hits enemies with reflective shields, so be careful with that. The good news is the skill won't be interrupted by control effects like freeze, as seen in this clip. Once it's up, it's staying up. The real strength of this skill is how flexible it is. You can drop a fast redeploy operator like Gravel on the other side of the map to deal with a threat, while Entelechia safely cleans up her own lane, or drop a unit right next to her to double up on damage in one spot. Totally up to you. The skill lasts around 10 seconds with a 20-second cooldown, which just so happens to match the typical cycle of Executor fast redeploy operators. In fact, skill 2 and Executors are basically best friends. Crown Slayer with skill 3 is an especially great pair candidate. She stuns enemies to keep them in range and stays invisible, so she can safely sit in a mob, while Entelechia's blades carve through everything. Watching Crown Slayer dismantle high-value targets without taking a scratch is honestly a little emotional. Another surprise synergy is with Sky Ranges like Contrail. Once she takes off, the Ring of Blades will hit any airborne enemies around her. Even better, while she's flying, ground enemies can't touch her, but the ring still damages them, making this a safe and effective combo. Worried about using up a deploy slot just to combo with this skill? Don't be. You can use things like Nightingale's Birdcage or Wishadel's Shadows, those count too. Even better, Virtuosa's skill 2 can trigger huge AoE necrosis bursts with this setup. Just keep in mind, this skill won't work with things like Ella's Mines. The rule of thumb is, if it's something enemies can target, then skill 2 will work with it. Now for the downside. Yep, damage per hit again. With the skill's attack boost, Entelechia sits around 1600 attack, and for a 20-25 damage dealer, that's kinda underwhelming. Against enemies with 1600 plus defense, she barely scratches them. In fact, with her module, she'll be doing around 80 damage per hit, the minimum guaranteed 5% of her attack. That's rough, especially if you were hoping to use this skill against elite enemies. The other slight drawback is having to keep track of your last ground deployed unit, but if you're running fast redeploy operators for this setup, that's not a problem. All in all, I think this is a great skill. It's creative, synergizes really well with her archetype, and opens up tons of cool strategies. It lets Entelechia bring her AoE power anywhere on the map without putting herself at risk. And with the fast hit rate, she also gets solid HP recovery from her trait. If you can live with the low DPH, this is a very solid tool to have. The mastery levels don't change much besides a small damage bump, so even level 7 is serviceable. But since this is actually one of Entelechia's best skills, going all the way might be worth it. Alright, we have finally made it to skill 3, and buckle up because there's a lot going on here. When activated, Entelechia's attack range expands slightly. She also gets a solid additive attack boost and a huge plus 100 attack speed. The faster attacks and wider range don't just help with damage, they also improve her survivability, since she heals with every hit. Now for the real star of the show, the candles. On skill activation, Entelechia summons up to 3 candles, each tethered to a ground enemy within her range. You'll see a blood red line connecting them. The game prioritizes high HP enemies, so the tankiest ones get the candles. These candles inherit 60% of the target's current HP, as well as their current defense and res. And yes, I said current, that will matter in a bit. Only Entelechia can attack these candles, and she's guaranteed to deal at least 35% of her attack as damage to them, no matter how tanky they are. Even if she can't pierce their defense, that guaranteed damage always goes through. Most importantly, all the damage she deals to a candle is transferred to the linked enemy. That transfer continues even if the enemy leaves her range or turns invisible. The candle damage still gets through. In a way, this gives Entelechia a kind of global reach, not bad for a ground unit. So in practice, here's what happens. She enters hyper mode, starts swinging like crazy and connects the 3 tankiest enemies to candles. She then shreds those candles and the damage drains the linked enemies, on top of whatever direct hits she lands. Now let's dive into the nitty-gritty. First up, that 35% guaranteed damage. Think of it like a better version of true damage. Why better? Because not only does this damage bypass things like defense and dodge, just like true damage, but it can even bypass some damage reductions that still affect true damage. For example, take a look at this clip. Theresa's damage reduction heavily nerfs Amiya's true damage, but Entelechia, her candle damage ignores it. Same with Kristen. Vina's true damage gets shut down, while Entelechia just melts through the boss. Another important mechanic. Remember, the candles copy current enemy stats at the moment you activate the skill. So if you land a defense debuff before using the skill, the candle inherits that debuffed stat, letting Entelechia deal more damage. That debuff is locked in, even if it expires right after. But, and this is important, if you debuff the enemy after activating the skill, it won't affect the candle. Also, buffs like Suzerain's Fragile don't help at all, they don't apply to the candle damage either. Now for the biggest downside, the candles inherit current HP. If you summon them when the enemy is already low on health, you only get 60% of that small HP pool. So even if Entelechia is chunking the candle, the actual damage transferred back is tiny. Worse still, this means that on your first skill use, when enemies are at full health, the damage looks amazing. But every use after that, diminishing returns. If an enemy has high defense and just a sliver of HP left, Entelechia can end up breaking the candle over and over and still fail to finish them off. Watching her struggle to kill something at 5% HP is painful. It kind of defeats the purpose of giving her something that feels like pseudo-true damage if she can't even land the final blow. Now let's talk comparisons, specifically the one everyone is thinking about, Entelechia vs Executor Alter, the other 6-star Reaper. Executor's whole gimmick is ammo. The more ammo he burns, the stronger he gets. At the end of his skill 3 cycle, when he's nearly out of bullets, that's when he starts hitting like a truck. His skill 3 is also offensive recovery, meaning he needs to keep attacking to charge it, and while the skill is active, his attack interval actually gets longer, which matters a lot for a Reaper, since he heals per hit, just like Entelechia. Slower attacks equals slower healing, which can get dangerous. Alright, now that the basics are out of the way, how do they compare in action? In most typical situations, they're pretty evenly matched. Both can dish out solid damage to enemies without inflated defense. But here's the catch, Executor has to ramp up. He starts slow and only gets scary once he's burned most of his ammo. Entelechia, meanwhile, gets going immediately. She activates skill 3 and bam, full power right away. That early burst, paired with her high survivability, actually lets Entelechia survive in maps where Executor just gets overwhelmed. She also has the edge when it comes to mechanics. Executor can't bypass dodge or damage reduction, while Entelechia's candle mechanic can ignore both. However, things shift when you're up against multiple high HP, high defense enemies. More than 3. That's where Executor shines. Once he's consumed some ammo, his DPS climbs fast, and he can start deleting enemies left and right. Entelechia, on the other hand, might take care of the ones she linked with candles, but really struggles against the rest. Her low damage per hit holds her back in these kinds of fights. So here's the bottom line. If you need early, consistent damage and good survivability, Entelechia is the better pick. She is also easier to manage, thanks to the auto SP recovery. But if you can afford to wait for the ramp up, Executor hits way harder, unless the enemy has ridiculous defense or damage reduction. And that wraps up skill 3. Honestly, it's Entelechia's signature skill, and their most creative one. Definitely worth mastering if you enjoy her kit. It brings good damage, strong survivability thanks to that fast attack speed, and it's got excellent uptime, 30-second cooldown, 20-second duration. That's solid cycling. That said, I can't help but think Hyperglyph made some odd design calls here. On one hand, this looks like a skill meant for boss killing, with all the pseudo true damage stuff. But then, it lacks the actual finishing power to close the deal, and in a game where we've got operators like Muenar, who can solo bosses without any help, that's disappointing. On the other hand, I'm not sure this skill fits the Reaper archetype that well. Reapers are supposed to clean up waves, not focus fire bulky enemies. And what's the point of having true AoE damage if the skill is centered around dispatching at most 3 enemies? It sort of goes against what Reapers are built to do. Alright, time to wrap this up. We have taken a deep dive into Entelechia's kit, and it's clear the devs put real effort into addressing the usual survivability problems that plague Reaper operators. She's got more HP than most, and even an emergency heal to keep her afloat. We also talked about her low damage per hit, especially noticeable with skills 1 and 2. But it's not all criticism. She brings some genuinely good tools to the table. Fast skill rotations, flexible positioning with skill 2, and that guaranteed damage from skill 3 that can punch through just about anything. So, does she suck? Well, it's complicated. You can't evaluate her in a vacuum. You've gotta look at what other operators can do in the same roles. Resources are tight in Arknights, after all. Pulling for Entelechia might mean skipping other strong operators down the line. As a solo lane holder, Entelechia does fine against weaker enemies with skill 1 or 2, and she has some tools to deal with bulkier threats using skill 3, but the fact that she still can't be healed really limits her in harder content. Compare that to Ulpianus, not even an enmity unit, and is overflowing with passive HP regen. It just feels unfair. And at the end of the day, Entelechia's got no crowd control, no utility and no debuffs, just pure damage. That puts her in direct competition with a ton of other operators. For lane holding, there's Ulpianus Blaze or Gavial Altar. For cleaning up trash mobs, there's no shortage of solid picks, even someone like Pepe can do the job. And for boss killing, Muenar, a nearly 3-year-old unit available for free in the set shop, is still in a league of his own. Even for content where Reapers shine, like Link's event or episode 13, Executor Altar is usually just as good, if not better. Plus, he is also hitting the set shop in global soon, and is indirectly getting even stronger thanks to the new Laterano operators. That said, Entelechia does have her niche. Skill 2 gives you great map coverage to snipe key targets from afar, and Skill 3 provides damage that cuts through damage reduction, helping wear down even the nastiest bosses. So yes, there are legit use cases, but for how narrow those niches are, it's hard to justify pulling her, especially with how stacked the upcoming banners are. We've got Monster, Exusiae Altar, Lamwen and Tragodia all on the horizon, top tier, possibly even meta-defining operators. In that context, Entelechia's banner might actually be the perfect excuse to save. So here's my final verdict: I would not suggest pulling for Entelechia, not because she's bad. She's perfectly viable, especially for newer players who just want a fun, stylish unit to carry them through early content. But when it comes to raw power and long-term utility, she doesn't really bring anything that others can do better or more safely. Plus, as a standard pool operator tied to a vignette event, this banner probably won't get a rerun, but you will be able to get her from future banners or off-banner pools. That said, if If you like Entelechia, none of this should matter. Arknights is a game, not a spreadsheet. Pull for who you love, have fun. The meta comes and goes, but waifus and vampires are forever. That's it from me. Thanks so much for watching, hope you found this helpful, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.